Hello and welcome. Thank you for coming in to Startup Spokane today and giving me an opportunity to speak about one of my favorite topics, which is B Corp and B Corp certification. My name is Kara Odegaard, and I work for Measurement Consulting here in Spokane. Just really briefly, I wanted to give you a little bit about me and what my background is. As I mentioned, we are a local company that help businesses measure their impact on society and the environment. We focus in a few areas. One is B Corp certification, which I'm going to talk about a little bit this afternoon, so you will have a better understanding what that means. We also help companies measure their social and environmental impacts. So we have a few different tools that we can help them with, and we provide strategic planning in lines with sustainability initiatives. So I have worked internationally in this line of work, and now in the last 2 years I've been focusing here in Spokane, so I'm excited to be here. Today I'm going to go through a few topics, but I wanted to kind of give you a framework for what we're going to talk about today. I wanted to give you a brief history of the corporate governance in the US, just so we can kind of have a historical context of why B Corp certification is so relevant today. I'm going to share with you a little bit about a new release from the Business Roundtable. If anybody here familiar with that organization? The Business Roundtable is an association of the top CEOs of American companies. So there are, I think, 181 or ish. That seemed a very specific number, but there are around 180 CEOs from American companies that belong to this association. And historically, they have been involved with policy that has to do with business. And they recently made an update to their principles of corporate governance, which I'm going to share with you today. And then we're going to go in and talk a little bit about B Corp, what a B Corp is, and the framework that B Corps use in order to help guide their businesses to follow best practices around environmental and social standards. And then I'll get into the legal entities of the different types of business structures that you can have as a B Corp. And lastly, there are a couple incentives that are unique to Spokane if you are a certified B Corp, which I'm really excited to share. So we'll just dive in. First of all, I will say that I am not an economist, and I'm not going to dive into too deep into this, but I do want to share with you an overview of the last 100 or so years and where corporate governance has really shifted over this last century. I would say back in the early part of the 20th century, the largest companies in our country really did have governance practices that looked at full stakeholder considerations. They believed that it was their responsibility to take care of their workers, to make sure they're to be good community citizens. I like to give the example of Henry Ford back in 1914, who decided that all of his workers should be able to afford to buy one of his cars, and so he doubled his employees' wage, and the employees working for the Ford factory were making twice as much as they could anywhere else. And as we move forward into the 30s and all the way up until the end of the war in the 50s, we had an era of what was referred to as managerialism, where big companies were investing in their employees' pensions. They gave large amounts to charitable causes within their communities. And they basically believed that it was the ultimate goal for business to be good citizens in their community. As we get into the 70s, we see a little bit of a shift, and we see that we have investors are kind of looking at these big companies with these great big pensions, and saying, hey, you know, what about us? We think that maybe you should pay more attention to those of us who are investing in your companies. And at the same time, a very famous economist started coming out with his theory. His name is Milton Friedman. You may have heard of him. But he had published a report or an essay that stated that the social responsibility of business was to increase its profits. And this kind of idea came up into corporate governance at the time, that the best company was the most profitable company, and without high profits, companies were not able to pay their employees, and without employees having jobs, then there weren't going to be contributions to charities. And so it was back then kind of the beginning of a trickle-down theory of profits should be prioritized. So I'm going to skip forward from that period era and go into, well, I guess what's not on this is in the 80s we saw a lot of shareholders and investors coming in and buying up companies who maybe, I guess, were a little less that were investing long term. And so you can come up closer if you want. And so you saw the rise of CEOs focusing highly on profit and short-term profit in order to keep their shareholders happy. In 2006, a new business structure came on in the American business community, and that is the Certified B Corporation. And this was a movement that we're going to talk a little bit more about later, where companies and businesses were saying, hey, we want to do more than just focus on profits. We believe that it's important that we're taking care of our employees, that we are taking care of the environment, and that we are contributing to the strength and vitality of the communities where we're doing business. Which brings us up to about a month ago, in August of 2019, the Business Roundtable, as I mentioned before, this organization of America's largest companies, formally announced that they're changing their principles of corporate governance. And that change looks a little like this. Now I know this is text heavy, I don't expect you to read it all, but these are direct quotes from the Business Roundtable press release. They say now that the purpose of a corporation is an economy that serves all Americans. And as I highlighted here in bold, they go through and bullet point their values here. And they say that companies should deliver value to their customers, that they should invest in their employees, that they should deal fairly and ethically with their suppliers, support the communities in which they work, and protect the environment. I'll come back to that. But at the end, they're shifting away. They say generating long-term value for shareholders is what's important. And the reason I bring this up is because traditionally in the last 40 years, we have seen corporations have to make a decision between investing in their employee benefits or investing in maybe new technology that might conserve environmental, might be better for the environment, but because they're rated on a quarterly basis, if they're putting in those investments now, that's reflecting negatively on their bottom line. So why this is important, now last month the Business Roundtable is saying we're no longer going to be focusing on the short-term gain. So I think that's really important. All right, I just want to let you sit here with this for a minute. This is a third, these logos here represent a third of the CEOs that signed this new corporate governance strategy. And you can see there are a lot of big companies, and for me, I was surprised. There's oil companies here. There are banks, big banks, aerospace, insurance. So I think this is, for me, I feel like this is a positive shift. I feel like these big companies coming forward and saying, yes, we are now looking at all stakeholders when we're doing our business. I think that gives permission to companies to stop focusing on short-term financial profits for their shareholders and invest in their employees and their customers and their communities. So I'm just going to shift back so you highlight this again to show, okay, now what? We have this new set of principles that we believe or that we hear from our corporate leaders that are important for us to focus on. How do we do this? Well, I think that's where the B Corp certification comes in. This here outlines the framework for B Corp certification. These are the areas in which companies who go through the B Corp model are evaluated. And as you can see, I didn't change any of these terms. These are all the same terms that have always been in the B Corp certification. But they're the same areas that were highlighted in the Business Roundtable's recent press release and their pivot towards a multi-stakeholder strategy or principles of corporate governance. Just a quick show of hands. I don't know, have any of you actually experienced with B Corp certification, or do you know what it is? Everybody's relatively new.
I do have a quick question,
yeah.
If I may. So where do unions fit into workers?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. The B Corp framework supports workers and their rights to collective bargaining, and I think it just depends on the industry and the company, but they have room within this framework. Does that answer your question, or
yeah.
Did you have something specific?
I mean, I've worked in organizations, both union and non-union, I'm just curious.
Yeah. The B Corp certification is a voluntary certification. It's a third party, it's administered by a third party. It's called, the organization's called B Lab. They're a nonprofit. And really, your whole company is assessed. So unlike fair trade or organic that might look at a particular product or service, a B Corp certification encompasses your entire operations, and it looks at how you govern your company, what type of mission do you have, and is your mission tied to a social or environmental concern? It doesn't have to be, but it could be. Are you voluntarily transparent in your activities and where you're supplying your raw materials from, where you're purchasing your materials from? Do you promote a local economy? So are you more likely to purchase your supplies locally, or do you ship them from the other side of the world? All of these questions are kind of asked of you when you go through the certification.
When you're going through that certification,
yeah.
do companies who actually really want to achieve it, does B Lab work with them to help move them along towards the areas that they might not be performing very well in?
Yes, so B Lab, like many nonprofits, is running lean. They don't have people that they do help you, but they don't have people that they can assign to your company and evaluate your company individually. You could hire someone like me to do this. You could go online and look for similar companies that are doing similar, either their product or service is similar to you, or they have similar values. There are a lot of free resources available that you can use as examples. But no, they don't actually help you establish your policies or create, your preferred supplier policy, or show you how to, evaluate your environmental impacts. But they will help walk you through the best practices once you take assessment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So what are Certified B Corps? Certified B Corps are, and this is a quote right off from B Lab, Certified B Corporations are a new kind of business that balance purpose and profit. Currently, globally, because it's a global certification, there are over 3,000 companies that are certified as B Corp within 150 industries, 64 countries, and they all have the one unifying goal of being of companies that are being better for people and the planet. They are legally required to consider all their impact on all stakeholders and not just their shareholders. So as a certified B Corp, you're making a voluntary commitment to consider your impact on your workers, your customers, your suppliers, the communities where you do business, and the environment. It's, as I mentioned, a growing global trend. This is a very simplified roadmap of what it might look like for you. Before you consider B Corp certification, you might want to consider your own company's values, on where your mission and values stand. What is your business case, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But get a baseline. How does your company compare to other certified B Corps or other conventional companies? There is an online assessment that you take, and it's a free tool. I recommend it to my clients who are even not considering certification. You can go online, and really what the assessment does is it asks you to consider in those 5 areas I mentioned, right? They ask you questions. Do you have a mission statement? Does your mission statement support any kind of social or environmental issue or impact? Do you have benefits for your workers? Are you considering the impact your purchasing practices have on the environment? Things like that. There is a company here, First Avenue Coffee in Spokane, that's going through the certification, or going through the assessment and using the assessment to solidify their own already good practices, but it's helping them to frame them in a way that align with global best practices and to put them in writing so that they can document them for their continued support of those practices. Yeah.
Is there a list of B Corp certified companies in Spokane?
I can tell you there are only 2.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so my company is one of them, Measurement and Certified B Corp, and Mutu Coffee Roasters out of North Spokane. They operate out of Petunias. Does anyone know that? It's a little gourmet grocery store on North Madison, just north of Northwest Boulevard. So yeah, it's new. B Corp certification is very new to Spokane, but it's not new to the Northwest. There are approximately 50 certified B corporations in the state of Washington. 50, and most of them are kind of sprinkled up and down the I-5 corridor on the west side. As in contrast, in Oregon, there are about 150 certified B Corps, and most of those are concentrated in the Portland metro area. And as a result of that, the B Corp community in Portland is this really strong ecosystem of companies that know each other's story, understand how, why they've certified and where their impact is. So because once you become a certified B Corp, your performance on those 5 areas gets published online. So that's the transparency piece. But in Portland, they support each other. They have regular opportunities for those companies to get together, share their best practices, and help boost each other's journey, because really it's not ever meant to be a final spot. You don't, and one of the beauties of the B Corp framework is that you don't just take the assessment and be done with it. The second you certify and it's approved, they pre-formulate your next year's goals and they list them out for you. Okay, according to what your score was, here are some areas where you could be focusing to improve your score for next time. And actually, if we have time, I can show you what that what the tool looks like if you're interested. And I'm also offering office hours through startups, so if we don't cover everything that you want to learn, you can contact me and I can help you through that. So as I mentioned, in order to become a Certified B Corp, you have to first take this assessment. There are a total of 200 points available on the assessment, and you have to score 80 points to pass. Now, I always kind of laugh at that because it sounds like, oh, 80 out of 200 sounds really easy to accomplish. Well, it's not. It's really hard. More than half of those points are available only to impact business models. An impact business model is a company that is specifically in business to solve a problem for the environment or for society. So an example of an impact business model might be if your company recycles, that's a standard environmental best practice. But if your company creates a recyclable packaging, then that's an impact business model. So if you're solving a waste problem versus practicing best practices. Does that make sense? So most conventional companies who haven't put any thought into their sustainability strategy, they score 50 points or less on the assessment. And even good companies that are doing all things right can struggle to get to that 80-point threshold. In part because after you take the assessment and you score that 80-point minimum, you have to prove that you're doing all those things. So it's not good enough to say, oh, we recycle and we're keeping track of our carbon outputs, right? You have to show how you're tracking your carbon impact, what the tools are that you're using, and that's just an example. For example, with my business, I have a low environmental impact, so those questions didn't even come up for my company. And that's another great thing about this tool is that it's very adaptable. So a web design company is going to get different questions than a bank or a manufacturer. Everybody will get questions depending on the type of business you're in. So once you submit your assessment and you finalize your written policies, then there is a documentation review with B Lab. So that's when you're assigned a B Lab representative that will look through your entire assessment and ask for your documentation. They will go back and forth to clarify anything that doesn't make sense for them. And then if you are, let's say you score 75 points and you're not quite up to that 80 points, they will then help give you some ideas of what you might want to do to reach that threshold. So there is a little give and take there. And then at the end of the process, I have this little arrow showing that you do have to make a legal commitment to become a Certified B Corp. And for me and for a lot of people, a lot of businesses, once they've gotten here, making that legal commitment's pretty easy. So I'll get into it a little more in a minute. I'll talk about the legal structures in a minute. It's my least favorite. But so you might ask why a company would certify. What's the benefit to a business? And I've listed here just a few of those things. I think I won't read them all off, but some of the big ones for me, you hear a lot, especially in Spokane, that we have this really amazing university system. We have a lot of people going to Gonzaga or Eastern or WSU here in Spokane, and when they graduate, they might not stay in Spokane. I know there have been a lot of efforts over the years. Young people want to work for companies whose values align with their own. They want to do business with companies whose values align with their own. And there have been a lot of research and findings out there that show that if your company has a strong mission and value system, then you're most likely to attract and retain the best talent. Some companies decide to certify to differentiate from their competitors. The benefit of having a B Corp certification, you can be a good sustainable company without the certification. There are lots of examples of this. But to have the certification shows that you've voluntarily allowed your practices to be evaluated by a third party, and so that consumers can see that stamp, the B Corp stamp, and know, a lot like you might purchase fair trade coffee, and you know that that coffee was acquired with a fair trade supply. Another good reason is to open up new markets for your company to drive sales. The coffee roaster I mentioned before, when they certified as a B Corp, they were contacted by a national online retailer who focused only on certified B Corp sales, and they wanted to purchase a quantity of coffee that this company was not able to. I mean, it was a good problem to have, but it was such a large amount that their coffee roasting operations wasn't able to supply them with their minimum order. I still like to tell that story because it's a really incredible opportunity, and I think that they're looking into partnerships with other certified B Corp coffees in the Pacific Northwest to maybe sell together online. But just really quickly, there was a recent Nielsen global survey that said 81% of the people worldwide believe that companies should help to improve the environment. 66% of consumers are willing to pay more for a sustainable brand. I think this is interesting. Last year, Unilever discovered that their sustainable brands, they have 28 sustainable brands in their massive portfolio of brands that they sell. Those 28 sustainable brands grew 69% faster than the rest of their brands. It was such a big deal for that company that the CEO of Unilever has announced that all of their brands are going to become sustainable brands in the future. And then, according to their own research, millennials, Unilever found that 90% of millennials will switch brands to ones that champion a cause. So, like environmentalism, and I'll show you a really good example of that coming up. But millennials in particular care about the social and environmental impacts of their companies. Okay, so legal entities. As I mentioned before, any kind of company can become a certified B Corp. You don't have to be a corporation. You can be a sole proprietor, you can be an LLC, or you could be a corporation.
Excuse me.
Yes?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Are there any industries that, just by the nature of their business, eliminate themselves from becoming B Corps?
Yes. So currently, I can give you a couple examples. Currently, businesses that operate in firearms, drugs, so they won't certify marijuana companies because they're not globally a legal industry. They won't certify I think casinos and gambling is probably one of those things that they don't look at. There is a certified B Corp energy company in I think I want to say in Maine, but somewhere on the East Coast. And when they certified the energy company, there was some question: why are you certifying? It was because of that energy company was making a shift from fossil fuels and changing their focus on creating energy that was more friendly to the environment.
I noticed that there you have BP, Quantico, Chevron, all of
Yeah, I think, I don't see a company on here that wouldn't qualify to become a B Corp. Now, just to be clear, these companies are not, as far as I know, are not pursuing B Corp certification. There may be a few in here, but all of them have signed on and to the set of principles that underlie the B Corp model, right? They've said that it's important for us to look at a long-term, multi-stakeholder approach to doing business. And so if they were to come to me, I would say, hey, if you want to live those values that you just, signed your name to, you don't have to recreate the wheel. B Corp certification or B Corp has a model for you. And in fact, they let anyone use it. You don't have to pay to use the tool, and you don't have to become certified B Corp to continue to use their assessment.
If I can just pursue that just a minute, because I do a lot of work in the oil industry.
Yeah.
And in fact, Chevron and BP have both been clients, as well as Quantico and not Marathon, but then I have clients that are oil field industry service companies, providers. So they're working specifically for Chevron, for instance, doing work on their wells and so on. So if oil and gas, if petrocarbons are sounds like they're kind of off limits for B Corps. Is that?
Well, I don't know. Not necessarily. I think it would depend on the practices and how. I guess if they, I don't know how to properly answer that question. I would assume that if they were making shifts towards their impact on the environment, if they were moving away from degradation and going towards conservation, then there could be a possibility for that. But that's a good question. I don't know. And it would also depend on how they treat the other stakeholders, their employees, right? But I'm not sure that B Lab would consider an oil company. I don't know the answer to that, and I can find out for you if you want.
I'm just curious. Just from some of the things you said, it sounds like this is a very millennial.
Well, there are a lot of older generations that are been pushing this. In fact, I think that it's popular with the millennial generations, but the companies that have made these commitments are generally not millennials business owners. So I'll show a couple examples in a minute. But just to talk really briefly about the legal entities, going back to your business entity, if you are incorporated as a corporation, then B Lab asks you to do you have to change from, if you're S Corp or a C Corp, then you have to become a benefit corporation. A benefit corporation is a legally recognized legal structure for a business. The way it differs from a C Corp or an S Corp is that you have language in your articles of incorporation that essentially make you a triple bottom line company. So your articles will say that you make your decisions based off of not just profits, but also the effect on multiple stakeholders, so people and the environment as well. The benefit corporation structure, I think, is now available in 37 states, but it is not available here in Washington State. So what we have in Washington State is something called a social purpose corporation, which is a corporation in which you can identify a specific social purpose. So you could say, there's a social purpose in Spokane that's identified their social purpose as enriching the lives of youth through sport. But that doesn't mean that that company has to also consider its impact on the environment, right? So B Lab doesn't see a social purpose corporation as being fully as having as many teeth as would a benefit corporation. But not to fear, you can still do this. So what would happen if you're in the state of Washington and you want to be a corporation and also a certified B Corp, then you would first change to a social purpose corporation, and then in your articles of corporation you would have language in there that essentially makes you a benefit corporation by saying that you consider all stakeholders in your decision-making process. Does that make sense, or is that super confusing?
That makes sense.
So the B Corp certification is a third-party certification. The benefit corporation is a legal structure, of which we don't have in Washington. We have the social purpose corporation.
Are we moving towards that?
Not that I know of. I think when Washington was considering benefit corporation as a status, the way I understand it, the Washington State Bar did not think, or whoever makes those decisions on corporate law, did not think that it was necessary, and felt like, I think they reluctantly even accepted the social purpose corporation, because I think they see it as any corporation can say whatever they want in their articles, but they don't have, so there doesn't need to be another form. People who advocate for benefit corporation believe that having the separate form is important because it provides a layer of transparency, because benefit corporations, as you can see here, they are required to publish a report of their social and environmental performance. Social purpose corporations are not, by the way, required to publish a report. They can if they want, but if you choose to certify as a B Corp, it comes along with the package. And as I mentioned earlier, I was going to tell you of the special incentives we have here in Spokane, which are actually rather unique. I've been looking for a similar city, a similar tax incentives, and haven't found anything. But what we do here in Spokane is we have two incentives. One is for social purpose corporations. And if you're a social purpose corporation, you get a discount on your business registration. But if you take that next step and you become a certified B Corp, you get the discount on your business registration and a waiver of the head tax, or what we refer to as a personnel tax. Most people in Spokane are very surprised to learn that we even have a personnel tax. Anyone here know that? It's really small. So companies of, I think, 5 and under or 10 and under pay $5 per person per year. But companies that have, I think 15 and over, don't quote me on that, but when you start getting in 15 or 20 employees, then you're paying $20 a year annually for that. And if you have a larger company, it's a slightly more significant. But I think that it's a step in the right direction. So I'll just end with this slide and then go with giving you some examples. But I would say that a B Corp is right for you, and these aren't all my words. This is in the spirit of B Lab. A B Corp is right for your company when your leaders realize that your most important assets go home every night, when your stakeholders want you to leave the earth more resilient than you found it, and when your leaders realize that your investors know that your vision extends beyond tomorrow's top and bottom line, or today's. That last slide again goes back to understanding that a long-term vision of investing in people and the environment has value over just looking at quarterly gains.
So did you say that B Lab is a certified entity?
Yes, B Lab, and their website is bcorporation.net. Okay, so any other questions about the certification process? That was very high level. Again, if you want more details, I'm more than happy. I brought today these little impact discovery workbooks. I'm really excited for these. These are new, and they in the back you can find some of the questions that are asked of you on the B impact assessment. So if you want to feel for what that might look like, you can pick one of these up. And yeah, any questions?
So
Yeah.
if you're a 501(c), then you go for the social impact on top of that?
Sorry, I should have mentioned, B Corp certification is only for profit.
Oh.
So the idea here is that businesses are able to make money while also doing good.
Okay.
But nonprofit organizations can still use the impact assessment to help with their operational, kind of guide their operations.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I should have mentioned that earlier, sorry.
No, that's good to know. I feel like I should have known that.
No, so
Pop
you know,
out.
I talk about B Corps all the time, and I feel like I say this, but I forget that they're not very well known here in Spokane.
Uh-huh.
And part of the problem is educating the consumers, right? So if your consumers don't know what a B Corp certification is, it's not likely going to be valuable to you. But
You did say this is a global.
this is global, yeah. So
Can you give me an example of? Can you give us an idea of globally where?
yeah, everywhere. So it's very popular it's most popular in the US. It's growing in popularity in the UK or in the Europe. There's a B Lab in, so every region kind of has their own B Lab entity, and the B Lab UK office is doing some amazing things around educating businesses and consumers, and their policies also are different than ours. Recently, I think they've made some changes to corporate law in the UK that requires them to have a similar, like they have to report out on their social and environmental impacts. So the B Corp certification model works really well with their existing laws. So Danone North America. So Danone is a very large conglomerate. It's headquartered out of France, and they do sell a lot of. I believe their main products are dairy products. Their North American version, the North American Danone just recently became the world's biggest certified B Corp, and they are considering certifying their entire operations globally. I think it took them, don't quote me on this, but I think it took them 2 years to certify that, just their North American operations. It was a really big task. So arguably one of the most famous certified B Corps is Patagonia, which I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. We can just go there. Ben & Jerry's ice cream, which is a Gap brand, they're certified B Corp. Yeah, I mean there are a lot of them. And to answer your question from earlier, how do you know what companies are certified as B Corps? If you go to bcorporation.net, they have a little search. It says Find a B Corp, I think, on their website, and you can search by country, by state, by industry, by city. So you can find, like for example, you could go and just search Washington State, and it'll pull up a whole list.
So do B Corps, they use the B Corp logo and put
Yeah.
it on their
Yeah.
advertising too, I would think.
Yeah, exactly.
And I assume this is an ongoing certification where they have to maintain a certain level.
Yeah.
And I was curious on the measurement. So the verbiage on the 5 elements is fairly generic. So
Yeah, that for,
so you have some more specific metrics, I would assume.
oh yeah, very specific. And I'm happy to sit down with you and show you more, and I can stay a little later after today and show you what the assessment looks like. And some of the questions are in that booklet if you want to take a look. But just real quickly, I like to end with a couple of examples of companies who've integrated sustainability. And I use the word sustainability very broadly to mean any kind of social or environmental impact. Generally, companies who, well, all certified B Corps are required to consider both social and environmental impact, but generally companies who make commitments to sustainability are looking at the whole picture, but some have emphasis in one area in particular. And this is Patagonia. They're an example of what I would call a company that really takes their governance practices very seriously. They recently changed their mission statement to say we're in business to save our home planet. And I want to note that that doesn't say we're in the business to save our home planet. Their purpose for having a business is to make money so that they can use those resources to help for environmental causes. For example, they have a program where they want you to not buy their stuff. Who does that, right? They want you to try to repair and buy secondhand clothes. So they have a whole online store called Wornwear, which are Patagonia items that have been returned for whatever reason, and it's like going to a secondhand store, but it's just for Patagonia items. And the other thing that Patagonia does, and does well, is they advocate for policy change, for new practices, anything that has to do with environmental issues. And so they were very involved with the climate strike that's actually ongoing. It started last Friday. Did anyone see that? It was really a big deal here in Spokane, which I was expecting there to be a lot of people, but not that many people. So we had a good showing. But Patagonia has this image here on the right is on their website. When you go to their website, that's the first thing you see. And not only do you see, you know, their messaging here that the youth are facing extinction, they're very dramatic. But they have an Act Now button that if you click on it, it will take you to a page where that tells you what you can do to get involved. And then just as another example, this is their office in Amsterdam that's on their office wall. They get very serious about it. They got a tax break this past year. I think it was like $4 million tax return with the corporate tax changes. They gave all that money into fighting climate-related issues or environmental issues.
They're amazing.
They're amazing. This is another one of my favorite certified B Corps, and if you have to go, please feel free to go, but I love this one. This is a brewery out of Portland. Is anyone familiar with Hopworks Urban Brewery? No? Well, you will be after this. Hub Beer is, they have an amazing sustainability program, but one of their primary focuses is on I call it a sustainable supply chain. If you know anything about beer, it takes quite a lot of water to produce beer. In fact, on average, not for this particular company, but on average in the industry, it can take anywhere from 5 to 10 gallons of water to make 1 gallon of beer. And so a few years back, Hub decided to measure. They started by measuring, right? It all starts with just knowing what your baseline is. They started by measuring how much water they used, and they found that they took 4.23 gallons of water for every gallon of beer, which is low by industry standards. But by creating, upgrading their equipment, reusing water where they could, they were able to get that number down to 3.39. Well, that wasn't good enough for them. So they decided to partner with a local nonprofit, Bonneville Environmental Foundation, where they worked with that nonprofit to restore watersheds into the same watershed where they were pulling water out of. So they have a water neutral operation where they're actually bringing in enough water to cover the water they take out. They also collaborate with their competitors to help defend the Clean Water Act in their region, which is super cool. How many industries do you see competitors getting together for one purpose? And which is actually really common in the B Corp community, which is something I didn't really talk much about, but one of the biggest values for me as a certified B Corp is belonging to this community of like-minded businesses. Anyway, so they're also, as you can see, this is one of their beers. What does that look like to you? Anyone recognize that? It kind of looks like the Patagonia logo. Well, that's because they partnered with Patagonia and the Land Conservancy to create this, to start investing in different types of grain that are perennial grains that are better for the environment. And it's really right now, these types of grain aren't as commercially viable as the mass-grown grains that most beers use, so they're working to invest in this. Again, this is an example of a long-term investment that doesn't necessarily reflect great on your quarterly returns, but overall it's making improvements for their industry. This next company, this is an example of an impact business model. As I mentioned before, this company is in business to solve a social problem. They're called Greyston Bakeries, and I love their motto. It says, "We don't hire people to bake brownies, we bake brownies to hire people." This brownie company is the sole supplier of brownies to Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and they have a very progressive hiring practices that basically if you want to have a job there, they put your name on a list. There's no background check, no drug testing, no, they don't look at your education. If a job opens up, they call you up and say, "Hey, do you want to work here? Yes or no?" And it's worked really well in their community. The founders of this company saw there was a problem in their community where people weren't able to get jobs because of maybe a former incarceration or a drug problem, and this has really made a big difference in their community. And then my last example is not a certified B Corp, but I love this example. So again, Nike isn't a B Corp, but they give an example of a company that's willing to take risks. And this is an eco-production model on the left here. Anybody like this shoe? I love it. This is their very first fly knit shoe. And a fly knit shoe is a shoe that is created from one piece of fabric. It reduces waste by 80% and eliminates the need for toxic glues. So this is their first one. As you may guess, it didn't sell very well. But the corporate governance policies at Nike were very forgiving. They're like, okay, didn't work the first time, let's figure this out. And now, here is an example of a shoe you probably all have seen before. Almost 10 years later, this is their most popular shoe. As you can see, I don't know if you can read it, it says since 2010, Nike Flyknit technology has prevented 3.5 million pounds of waste from going into landfill. What's unique and important about this example is that the fashion industry is a huge contributor to our global waste problem. I mean, it's massive. We throw out so many clothes and shoes, and there's a lot of things about the fashion industry that are toxic. And Nike has recognized that. And you may not be able to read this, but I love what Noel Kinder, their Chief Sustainability Officer, says. He says, at Nike, we believe that climate change is the defining environmental issue of our generation, because the reality is, if there's no plan, there's no sport. So basically, this is really not 100% altruistic, right? There is self-interest in these companies investing in environmental impact issues. If there isn't an environment that's healthy for us to enjoy outdoors and to be active in, Nike doesn't have a business. So anyway, that's all I have for today. I wanted to thank you for coming, and I'm happy to answer any questions for you. Yeah.
Is there any data out there for, or maybe this is a dumb question, but for sole owner businesses using a B Corp certification to build their business?
You mean to grow
Get
from just
certified,
one?
Sort of like the example you gave for the coffee company finding more demand for their business just by this simple certification.
Right. So I've read reports on companies in general that have purpose and sustainability as their underlying strategy. They tend to do well over time. I will look into that question and look specifically. I would not be surprised that if you, so every year they have the annual Pacific Northwest B Corp conference in Portland, and the last 2 years I've gone, and just hearing the stories and the success that those companies are having, I would be shocked if there isn't an example. So I'll look for you, and if you want to leave me your email address, I can try to find it.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That's
Thank
great.
you. Appreciate it.